She fell to her knees in the snow, her baby silent against her chest, too silent. 4 little girls huddled behind her, their lips blue, their eyes empty. The town had turned its back. Every door had closed. And now, with the blizzard screaming around them, Sarah Jane Holloway understood the truth. They were going to die out here, all 6 of them, and no one would care. But then she saw the light, a single lantern cutting through the white darkness, and a man's voice rough as gravel. "What in God's name?" Stay with me until the very end of this story. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Sarah's journey has traveled across the world. Now, let's begin. The door slammed in her face so hard the ice cracked off the frame. Sarah didn't flinch. She'd stopped flinching 3 doors ago. "Please," she said to the wood, her voice barely a whisper now. "My children, they're freezing. Just one night. Just get off my porch." Mrs. Henderson's voice came muffled through the door. "Take your bastards and go." Emma's hand tightened in Sarah's skirt. 8 years old, and she'd heard that word so many times this week, she'd stopped crying when she heard it. Sarah turned away from the door. The wind hit her like a fist driving snow into her eyes, her mouth every gap in her worn coat. In her arms, 6-month-old Samuel had stopped crying an hour ago. That scared her more than anything else. "Mama," Lucy's voice small and trembling. "Mama, I can't feel my feet." "I know, baby." Sarah pulled her daughters closer, trying to shield them with her body. Grace clung to her legs silent, as always her ragdoll Rosie clutched against her chest. Lily, only 2.5, had stopped walking 10 minutes ago. Emma carried her now, staggering under the weight. They'd been to 7 houses, 7 doors, 7 rejections. "We ain't got room for another man's leavings." "Should have thought about that before you spread your legs." "Victor Holloway says you owe him money. Can't be helping no debtor." Victor, her dead husband's cousin. The man who'd stolen everything, the ranch, the cattle, the money Thomas had worked so hard to save. The man who'd forged documents and bribed the banker and turned the whole town against her with his lies. And now he'd thrown her out. In January, in the worst blizzard Wyoming had seen in a decade. "Mama," Emma's voice cracked. "Lily ain't moving no more." Sarah's heart stopped. She spun around, nearly dropping Samuel, and grabbed Lily from Emma's arms. The little girl's eyes were closed, her skin waxy and pale. "No, no, no, no." Sarah pressed her lips to Lily's forehead. Cold. Too cold. "Lily, baby, wake up for Mama." Nothing. "Emma, take Samuel." Sarah thrust the baby into her oldest daughter's arms. "Hold him against your chest, under your coat. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her own face blue with cold, and tucked her baby brother inside her threadbare coat. Sarah lifted Lily and held her close, rubbing her back, her arms trying to force warmth into the tiny body. "Please, God, please. Not her. Take me instead. Take anything. Just not my babies." The wind howled its answer. The snow fell harder. "There's one more house." Emma's voice was flat, exhausted. "That big ranch. The one on the hill." Sarah looked up. Through the swirling white she could just make out a shape in the distance. A house. Bigger than the others. Lights in the windows. The Callahan place. She'd heard stories about Caleb Callahan. A loner. A recluse. A man who'd come back from the war with dead eyes and a limp and a soul that had forgotten how to feel. He'd buried his parents 8 years ago and hadn't spoken more than 10 words to anyone in town since. "He won't help us," Sarah said, but she was already walking, her legs moving on pure instinct. "He doesn't help anyone." "Then we'll die," Emma said simply. "We'll die, and Victor wins." Sarah looked at her daughter, her beautiful, brave, bitter daughter, and felt something harden inside her chest. Something cold and sharp and unbreakable. No, she said. Victor doesn't win. Not tonight. Not ever. She started walking. The Callahan ranch was further than it looked. By the time Sarah reached the fence, she couldn't feel her hands or her feet. Lily had started shivering again, a good sign her body's still fighting, but Lucy had gone quiet, and Grace hadn't spoken in what felt like hours. The house rose up before them, 2 stories of solid timber, a porch wrapped around the front. Smoke curled from the chimney. Warm. Safe. Everything they weren't. Sarah pushed through the gate. Her legs buckled. She went down hard. Lily still clutched against her chest, her knees hitting the frozen ground with a crack that sent pain shooting up her spine. She tried to stand. Couldn't. "Emma!" she gasped. "Emma, take the girls to the door. Knock. Don't stop knocking until—" "I ain't leaving you, Mama. Do as I say." The words came out sharper than she intended, fueled by terror. "You get your sisters to that door. You hear me? You don't let them die out here. You don't—" The front door opened. Light spilled out onto the snow, golden and warm. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, a rifle in his hands. "What in God's name?" The voice was deep, rough, like someone who'd forgotten how to talk to people. "Please." Sarah tried to stand again, failed again. "Please, sir. My children. They're freezing. Just one night. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just please don't let them die." The man didn't move. Sarah felt despair wash over her, black and cold as the storm itself. This was it. This was the end. She'd begged and pleaded and humiliated herself at every door in town, and now she was going to watch her children die in the snow, while this stranger. He set down the rifle. He walked out into the storm, coatless, hatless, as if the blizzard meant nothing to him at all. In 3 strides, he was at Sarah's side, and without a word, he scooped her up, Lily and all, and carried her toward the house. "Emma!" Sarah twisted in his arms. "My other girls, my son, Pete!" The man's voice boomed across the yard. "Get out here now." Another figure appeared in the doorway, older, smaller, moving with the stiffness of age, but the urgency of someone who understood crisis. "Lord have mercy." The old man hurried toward Emma and the other children. "Come on, little ones. Come on now. Let's get you inside." Sarah felt warmth hit her skin, real warmth from a fire from walls that blocked the wind, and nearly sobbed with relief. The man carried her through a doorway and set her down on something soft. A chair. By a stove. "The little one." He pointed at Lily in Sarah's arms. "How long she been like that?" "I don't know. 20 minutes. Maybe more." He took Lily from her before Sarah could protest, handling the child with surprising gentleness for a man with such rough hands. He pressed his fingers to Lily's neck, then her wrist. "She's alive. Cold as hell, but alive." He turned to the old man who was herding the other children inside. "Pete, get blankets, all of them. And heat water, not hot, just warm. We need to bring their temperature up slow." "Already on it." The old man, Pete, moved with practiced efficiency, gathering blankets from a chest, putting a kettle on the stove. Sarah tried to stand. Her legs still wouldn't cooperate. "Sit." The man's voice was a command, not a request. "You're half frozen yourself. You try to move, now you'll collapse, and then you won't be any use to anyone." He was right. She knew he was right. But watching a stranger handle her baby, her Lily, her sweet little Lily, who called every man Papa, because she'd never known her own, "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Why are you helping us?" The man didn't look at her. He was focused on Lily, rubbing her small hands between his larger ones, his movements careful and deliberate. "Name's Caleb Callahan, and I'm helping because you showed up half dead on my doorstep." He glanced at her, then just briefly. His eyes were gray, cold, like winter sky. "What kind of man would I be if I let children freeze?" The kind most men in this town are, Sarah said, before she could stop herself. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Not quite surprise, not quite anger. Something Sarah couldn't name. "Pete," Caleb said, still holding Lily. "Get the little ones out of those wet clothes. There's some old shirts in the back room. They'll be too big, but they're dry." "Yes, sir." Pete gathered the children with the ease of someone who'd done this before. Emma resisted. "I'm staying with Mama." "Emma." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Go with Mr. Pete. Help your sisters. I'll be right here." Emma looked at Caleb Callahan with eyes that held no trust, no gratitude, nothing but the wariness of a child who'd learned that adults couldn't be counted on. Then she followed Pete into the back room, her siblings trailing behind her. The house was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Sarah sat in the chair wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember accepting and watched Caleb Callahan work on her daughter. He was not what she'd expected. The stories painted him as a monster, a recluse, a man who'd killed in the war and come back with blood on his hands and ice in his heart. But his hands on Lily were gentle. His voice when he spoke to the child was soft. "Come on, little one. Wake up for me. That's it. There you go." Lily's eyes fluttered open. She looked at Caleb's face so close to hers and didn't scream or cry or pull away. She just blinked at him with those big blue eyes and said in a voice barely louder than a whisper, "Papa." Sarah's heart cracked. Caleb went still. Something moved across his face. Pain, maybe, or fear, or something else entirely. And then he was handing Lily back to Sarah, stepping away, putting distance between himself and the child. "She's confused," he said roughly. "From the cold. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know." Sarah pulled Lily close, pressed her lips to her daughter's hair. "She does that. Calls every man Papa. She was only 4 months old when Thomas died. She doesn't remember him." Caleb nodded once, sharp and brief. "Your husband?" "Yes." "What happened?" "Fever. 2 years ago." Another nod. He turned away, moved to the stove, poured something into a cup. When he brought it back to her, Sarah saw it was broth, hot and steaming. "Drink. Slowly. Your body needs to warm up from the inside." Sarah took the cup with trembling hands. The first sip burned going down, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. "Mr. Callahan." "Caleb." "Caleb." She tested the name. It felt strange in her mouth. "I need to tell you something, before you decide to let us stay." He raised an eyebrow. "Waiting." "Victor Holloway." Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes. "He's telling everyone in town that I owe him money, that I'm a liar and a thief, that I—" She swallowed hard. "That I'm not a decent woman." Caleb's expression didn't change. "I know Victor Holloway." "Then you know he has power, influence. If you help us, he'll—" "Victor Holloway is a snake." The words were flat final. "He cheated my father out of 50 head of cattle in 72. I've got no use for anything that man says." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite relief, she'd learned not to trust relief, but something close to it. "He forged documents." She said the words tumbling out now that she'd started. "My husband's signature. He said Thomas owed him money, but Thomas didn't owe anyone anything. We were careful. We saved. And when Thomas died, Victor swooped in like a vulture and took everything. The ranch, the cattle, everything Thomas worked for, everything he wanted to leave to his children." Caleb listened without interrupting. His face revealed nothing. "I tried to fight it," Sarah continued. "Went to the sheriff, the judge, the banker, but Victor had already gotten to them. Money talks louder than truth in this town, and I didn't have any money left." "So he threw you out?" "Today. This morning." Sarah's voice broke just slightly. "I asked for 1 more week, just until the storm passed. He laughed. Said if I wanted to stay warm, I knew where his bedroom was." Caleb's jaw tightened. It was the first real emotion Sarah had seen on his face. "What did you do?" I spat in his face. A ghost of a smile crossed Sarah's lips. Then I took my children and walked out. For a long moment, Caleb just looked at her. Then something changed in his expression. Not warmth exactly, not kindness, but something like respect. "You've got backbone, Mrs. Holloway. Sarah Holloway." She hesitated. "But that name belongs to Victor's family. I'd rather just be Sarah if it's all the same." "Sarah." He said it once as if testing the weight of it. "You and your children can stay tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." "And tomorrow, when the storm clears?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I've got a cabin on the property. Used to house ranch hands back when my father ran cattle. It's been empty for years, but it's solid, warm, big enough for a woman and 5 children." Sarah's breath caught. "You'd let us—" "It ain't charity." His voice hardened. "I need help around here. Pete's getting old and I can't do everything myself. You said you'd work. I'm holding you to that." "Yes." Sarah nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I know how to keep a household running, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "I can see that." Caleb's eyes moved over her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the hollows in her cheeks, the determination that burned beneath the exhaustion. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." "I haven't. Not properly. Not since—" Sarah stopped. She didn't want to talk about the nights she'd lain awake in Victor's house, a chair wedged under her door, her children sleeping around her waiting for footsteps in the hall that never came, but always might. Caleb seemed to understand without her saying it. Something dark moved through his eyes. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "You and your children. Victor Holloway sets foot on my land, he'll leave with a bullet in him." Sarah believed him. God help her. She believed every word. Pete returned, then leading the children back into the main room. They'd been changed into old shirts that hung past their knees, their wet clothes bundled in their arms. Emma still carried Samuel, who had woken up and was fussing quietly. "Got 'em all dried off," Pete reported. "The little one with the doll ain't said a word, but she's warming up good. The baby's hungry, I reckon." Sarah reached for Samuel, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. "He needs to nurse. Is there somewhere I could—" "Back room." Caleb pointed. "Second door on the left. There's a bed. Get some rest while you're at it. All of you." He said it like an order, but Sarah heard something else beneath the gruffness. Concern, maybe. Or just the practicality of a man who understood that exhausted people made mistakes. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Caleb's face closed down again, that careful blankness settling over his features. "Don't thank me yet. You don't know what you're agreeing to." Sarah looked at him, this strange, cold, unexpectedly gentle man, and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. "I know I'm agreeing to keep my children alive," she said. "That's enough." She gathered her daughters and followed Pete down the hallway, leaving Caleb Callahan standing alone by the fire, staring into the flames with eyes that held too many ghosts. The back room was simple but clean. A bed large enough for all of them, quilts piled high, a small stove in the corner that Pete had already lit. The children collapsed onto the mattress in a pile of exhausted limbs, and within minutes, Lucy, Grace, and Lily were asleep. Emma sat apart, her back against the headboard, watching Sarah nurse Samuel. "I don't trust him," Emma said quietly. "I know. He could be lying, could be just like Victor, could be worse. I know." Sarah looked at her daughter, her fierce, protective, too old, too young daughter, and felt her heart ache. "But we didn't have a choice, Emma. We were going to die out there. Maybe dying would have been better than—" "Don't." Sarah's voice was sharper than she intended. "Don't you ever say that. You hear me? I didn't carry you through a blizzard and beg at 7 doors and watch your sister almost freeze to death just to hear you say dying would be better." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back furiously, but one escaped sliding down her cheek. "I'm scared, Mama." The admission broke something in Sarah. She shifted Samuel to one arm and held out the other. Emma hesitated just for a moment, and then she was in Sarah's arms, crying silently against her shoulder. "I'm scared too," Sarah whispered. "I'm scared every single day. But we're still here. We're still breathing. And as long as we're breathing, we've got a chance. What if he turns out to be bad? What if he hurts you? What if... Then we'll run again. We'll find another way." "But Emma..." Sarah pulled back, cupped her daughter's face in her hands. "I saw something in that man's eyes. When he was holding Lily, when she called him Papa, he looked scared. Not angry, scared. Why would that be good? Because men who can still feel fear are men who can still feel other things. Kindness, compassion, love." Sarah wiped the tears from Emma's cheeks. "It's the men who don't feel anything you've got to watch out for, the ones with empty eyes. Victor has empty eyes. Caleb Callahan doesn't." Emma considered this. "He's still a stranger." "He is, and we'll be careful. We'll watch him. We won't trust him with anything important until he earns it." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "But for tonight, we're warm. We're dry. We're alive. That's more than we had an hour ago." Emma nodded slowly. The tension in her small body eased just slightly. "Get some sleep," Sarah said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Emma crawled into bed with her sisters curling around Lily protectively. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out. Sarah sat alone in the dim room, Samuel sleeping against her breast, and listened to the storm rage outside. Somewhere in the house, she heard footsteps, Caleb probably moving through the rooms he'd lived in alone for 8 years. She thought about what Emma had said. "I don't trust him." Smart girl. Sarah didn't trust him either. She'd learned the hard way that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she'd also learned something else in the past 2 years. Something hard and sharp and necessary. Sometimes you had to take a chance. Sometimes you had to leap without knowing where you'd land. Sometimes the only choice was between certain death and uncertain survival. Sarah had chosen survival. For herself. For her children. Whatever came next, she would face it the way she'd faced everything else since Thomas died, with her chin up, her back straight, and her children behind her. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. Yet, Caleb stood at the window watching the snow fall. Pete had gone to bed an hour ago, muttering something about fool women and fool children and fool men who don't know when to mind their own business. But Caleb couldn't sleep, couldn't even think about sleeping. Not with 6 strangers in his house. Not with that woman's eyes burned into his memory. "Please, sir. My children. They're freezing." He'd seen a lot of things in his life. Battlefields soaked in blood. Men dying with bullets in their guts, crying for their mothers. His own parents cold and still in their beds, taken by the same fever that had swept through the territory that winter. But he'd never seen anything like Sarah Holloway on her knees in the snow, clutching her dying child, begging a stranger for help. She hadn't cried. That was the thing that got to him. She'd been desperate, exhausted, half-frozen herself, and she hadn't cried. She'd just asked. Clearly, simply, like she already knew the answer would be no, but had to ask anyway. And then that little girl, the one with the blue lips and the closed eyes, the one who'd opened her eyes and looked at him and said, "Papa," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Caleb had wanted to run. He'd wanted to hand the child back and walk away and pretend he'd never heard that word in that voice. Because he wasn't anyone's papa. He wasn't anyone's anything. He was just a ghost living in his dead parents' house, waiting for something, death maybe, or purpose, or just an end to the endless empty days. But he hadn't run. He'd stayed. He'd helped. And now there was a woman in his back room. A woman with 5 children and no husband, and eyes that had seen too much and still hadn't given up. Sarah. He turned her name over in his mind. Sarah Holloway. No, she'd said she didn't want that name. Just Sarah. Just Sarah, with her backbone and her broken heart and her babies who called strangers Papa because they didn't know any better. Caleb turned away from the window. The fire was dying down, but he didn't add more wood. Didn't matter. The cold inside him had nothing to do with temperature. He walked to his room, lay down on his bed, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall a child coughed. Then, silence. What have I done? The question echoed in the darkness unanswered. What in God's name have I done? Morning came gray and cold, but the storm had passed. Sarah woke to the sound of a door closing somewhere in the house. For one terrible moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The smell was wrong. Everything was wrong. Then memory crashed back the blizzard, the begging, the man who'd carried her out of the snow, and she sat up so fast her head spun. The children were still asleep, piled together like puppies. Samuel lay in the crook of her arm, his tiny fist pressed against his mouth, breathing soft and even. Alive. All of them alive. Sarah pressed her hand to her chest and let herself breathe. She slipped out of bed, carefully tucking the quilts around her children, and padded barefoot to the door. Her clothes from yesterday were still damp, but someone Pete probably had hung them near the small stove to dry. She pulled on her dress, wincing at the cold fabric, and stepped out into the hallway. The house was quiet except for sounds from the kitchen. The smell of coffee and frying bacon made Sarah's stomach clench with hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal. She followed the smell and found Caleb Callahan standing at the stove, his back to her. He was bigger than she remembered. Taller. Broader. In the daylight, she could see the gray threading through his dark hair, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, like a man carrying weight that never got lighter. "You're up." He didn't turn around. Sarah wondered how he'd known she was there. "I wanted to thank you again. For last night." "Already thanked me." He flipped something in the pan. "Don't need to hear it twice." Sarah bit back her response. She'd dealt with difficult men before. Caleb Callahan's gruffness was nothing compared to Victor's oily charm that hid poison underneath. "Is there something I can do to help with breakfast?" Now he turned. His eyes moved over her face, and Sarah knew what he was seeing. The hollows under her eyes, the sharpness of her cheekbones, the signs of too many missed meals given to children instead. "Sit down," he said. "Eat something. You look like a strong wind would blow you over." "I'm stronger than I look." "Didn't say you weren't." He pulled a plate from the shelf and loaded it with bacon, eggs, bread. More food than Sarah had seen in weeks. "Said you look like you need feeding. Sit." Sarah sat. Not because he'd told her to, but because her legs were shaking, and her stomach was screaming, and she knew he was right. The first bite of bacon nearly made her cry. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. She forced herself to eat slowly, to chew properly, to not wolf it down like an animal. Caleb watched her for a moment, then turned back to the stove. "There's more when you want it. Pete went to check on the cattle. He'll be back before noon. The cabin you mentioned." Sarah swallowed another bite. "The one for ranch hands. When can we see it?" "After you finish eating. After your children wake up and eat. After—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "After we talk about what this arrangement actually means." Sarah set down her fork. "All right, let's talk now." Caleb turned to face her fully. In the morning light, she could see his eyes more clearly gray, yes, but with flecks of blue. Cold eyes. Guarded eyes. The eyes of a man who'd learned not to let anyone too close. "I don't know anything about children," he said bluntly. "Never had any. Never wanted any. They're loud and messy, and they ask too many questions." Sarah felt her hackles rise. "My children. I ain't finished." He held up a hand. I'm telling you straight because I don't want misunderstandings later. I'm offering you a place to stay and work to do. I'm not offering to be a father to your children. I'm not offering to be anything except an employer. You understand? Sarah understood. She understood perfectly. That's fine, she said, keeping her voice level. My children have a father. He's dead, but they have one. They don't need another. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or relief. Good. Then we understand each other. We do. Sarah picked up her fork again. What kind of work did you have in mind? Cooking, cleaning, mending. Pete's getting too old for household work and He stopped, looked away. I ain't much good at it. Never learned. My mother did all that, and after she died... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I can do all of those things, Sarah said. I can also keep books if you need it. My father was a school teacher. He taught me to read and write and figure numbers. Caleb's eyebrows rose slightly. That's so. That's so. I taught my own children too. Emma can read as well as any boy her age. Lucy's learning. I won't have my daughters growing up ignorant just because they're girls. For the first time, something that might have been approval crossed Caleb's face. My mother thought the same way. Taught me my letters before I could walk practically. He paused. You'll want to keep teaching them, I expect, while you're here. Yes. There's books in the front room. Belong to my mother. You can use them. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. It was such a small thing, an offer of books, but it meant more than Caleb Callahan probably realized. Thank you, she said. That's very kind. Caleb looked uncomfortable. Ain't kind. Books just sitting there collecting dust. Might as well be useful. The sound of small feet interrupted them. Lucy appeared in the doorway, her borrowed shirt hanging past her knees, her hair a wild tangle around her face. Mama, I'm hungry. Come here, sweetheart. Sarah held out her hand. Mr. Callahan made breakfast. Lucy's eyes went to Caleb wide and curious. She studied him the way she studied everything intently, thoroughly, cataloging every detail for later consideration. You're big, she announced. Caleb blinked. I reckon I am. Are you a giant? Lucy. Sarah's voice held a warning. It's fine. Caleb's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. I ain't a giant, little miss, just a regular man. Papa was regular too. Lucy climbed into the chair next to Sarah. But he died. Are you going to die? Lucy? Everyone dies eventually. Caleb said, his voice surprisingly gentle. But I ain't planning on it any time soon. Lucy considered this. Okay. She reached for a piece of bacon. Can I have some? The next hour was chaos. The other children woke one by one, Grace silent and clinging to Sarah's skirt, Lily demanding to be held, Emma stalking into the kitchen with suspicion written all over her face. Samuel needed nursing, then changing, then nursing again. The kitchen that had been quiet and orderly became a whirlwind of small voices and smaller bodies. Caleb retreated to the far corner of the room and watched with the expression of a man who'd accidentally stepped into a bear's den. Sorry, Sarah said, catching his eye over Lily's head. I know it's a lot. It's fine. He didn't sound fine. He sounded like he was barely holding on to his composure. I'll be in the barn. When you're ready to see the cabin, come find me. He was out the door before Sarah could respond. Emma watched him go with narrowed eyes. He doesn't like us. He doesn't know us, Sarah corrected. That's different. He ran away. He went to work. There's a difference. Sarah set Lily down and began gathering the dishes. Emma, help me clean up. Lucy, keep an eye on your sisters. Grace, sweetheart, eat something. You barely touched your breakfast. Grace shook her head, pressing closer to Sarah's leg. She hadn't spoken since they'd arrived. Sarah was used to Grace's silences. She'd always been a quiet child, more comfortable with animals than people, but this was different. This was fear. Sarah knelt down, putting herself at eye level with her daughter. "Grace, look at me." Grace's eyes, huge and dark in her thin face, met Sarah's. "We're safe here," Sarah said quietly. "I know it's scary. I know everything's different. But I promise you we're safe. That man, Mr. Callahan, he's not going to hurt us. Do you believe me?" Grace's lower lip trembled. She clutched Rosie tighter. "Nod if you believe me, sweetheart." A tiny nod. So small, Sarah almost missed it. "Good girl." Sarah kissed her forehead. "Now eat something. Just a little, for me." Grace reached for a piece of bread, nibbling at the edges like a mouse. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sarah straightened up and found Emma watching her with an expression that was far too old for 8 years. "You don't know he won't hurt us," Emma said quietly. "You don't know anything about him." "You're right." Sarah wouldn't lie to her daughter. "I don't know, but I know what I saw last night when he was holding Lily. I know what I heard in his voice. And right now, Emma, that's all we have. That's all we can go on." Emma was silent for a long moment. Then she turned away and began stacking dishes with more force than necessary. "I still don't trust him." "That's fine." Sarah watched her daughter work, her heart aching. "You don't have to trust him. You just have to give him a chance. Can you do that?" Emma didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. The cabin was better than Sarah had dared to hope. It sat 100 yards from the main house, nestled against a small rise that blocked the worst of the wind. One room, but large enough for a family. A fireplace big enough to heat the whole space. A bed in one corner, a table and chairs in another, shelves along the walls waiting to be filled. It was dusty. Cobwebs hung from the rafters. The floor was covered in old leaves and debris that had blown in through the cracked door. But it was solid, warm once they got a fire going. A home. "It'll need cleaning," Caleb said, standing in the doorway like he was afraid to come inside. "There's supplies in the barn, broom mop, that kind of thing. The well's out back. Privy too. It's perfect." Sarah turned in a slow circle, already seeing what it could be. Quilts on the bed, flowers on the table, her children sleeping safe and warm. "It's absolutely perfect." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "It ain't much. It's everything." Sarah faced him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she let herself really smile. "Mr. Callahan, you've given us more than you know. I won't forget it." He looked away, his jaw tight. "Like I said, I need help around the place. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." "Of course." Sarah kept her voice neutral. "A business arrangement." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of work and exhaustion. Sarah threw herself into cleaning the cabin, scrubbing floors and walls, beating rugs, washing windows that hadn't been touched in years. Emma helped, silent but efficient, while Lucy watched the younger children and peppered Sarah with endless questions about their new home. When the cabin was clean, Sarah turned her attention to the main house. She'd made an agreement after all. Work in exchange for shelter. She intended to keep her end of the bargain. The kitchen was her first priority. Caleb and Pete had been living like men, without women, eating the same few meals over and over, letting dishes pile up, ignoring the cobwebs in the corners. Sarah cleaned everything, organized the pantry, started cooking real meals instead of the simple fare they'd been surviving on. The first time she put a proper dinner on the table, roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread. Pete looked at her like she'd performed a miracle. Lord have mercy. He sat down slowly, staring at the food. "I haven't seen a spread like this since Mrs. Callahan passed." "It's just dinner," Sarah said, but she felt a warm glow of satisfaction. Caleb ate without comment, but Sarah noticed he took seconds and thirds, and when he thought no one was looking, he closed his eyes and let out a small sound that might have been pleasure. The children ate in the cabin, which was how Caleb preferred it. He hadn't said as much, but Sarah could read between the lines. The noise and chaos of 5 young ones was too much for a man who'd lived in silence for 8 years. She didn't push, not yet. The children were safe and fed and warm. That was enough. But something was building. Sarah could feel it in the air like the pressure before a storm. Victor Holloway hadn't given up. He was out there somewhere planning his next move. When he came, she would be ready. It happened on the 5th day. Sarah was in the kitchen kneading bread when she heard the sound of hooves in the yard. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her hands stilled. Her heart began to pound. "Pete." She kept her voice calm. "Who's that coming?" Pete moved to the window, squinting against the afternoon light. His face went hard. "Trouble." Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch. What she saw made her blood run cold. Victor Holloway sat astride a fine bay horse, flanked by 2 men Sarah didn't recognize. Big men. Rough men. The kind of men who did things for money and didn't ask questions. Behind them, barely visible, was Sheriff Garrett. Victor smiled when he saw her. That oily, satisfied smile that had haunted her nightmares for 2 years. "Well, well." He removed his hat, a mockery of politeness. "If it isn't the lovely Mrs. Holloway, I've been looking everywhere for you. Get off this property." Sarah's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "You have no business here." "Oh, but I do." Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I have a warrant for your arrest, Sarah. For theft, for fraud, for—" "That warrant's not worth the paper it's printed on." The voice came from behind Sarah. She turned and found Caleb Callahan stepping onto the porch, his rifle in his hands. He looked different than she'd ever seen him. Taller somehow. Harder. His eyes, usually so carefully blank, blazed with cold fury. Callahan. Victor's smile faltered just for a moment. "This doesn't concern you. You're on my land. That makes it concern me. This woman is a criminal. She stole—" "She didn't steal anything." Caleb moved forward, putting himself between Sarah and Victor. "And we both know it." Victor's face reddened. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Caleb raised the rifle, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it in a way that made clear he knew how to use it. "You came onto my property with hired guns and a bought sheriff. You want to arrest this woman for crimes we both know she didn't commit. And you expect me to just stand aside and let you—" "The law is the law, Callahan." "The law." Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The law is what men like you twist to get what you want. But this ain't town Holloway. This is my land. And on my land, my word is law." Victor's hands tightened on his reins. "You're protecting a debtor and a thief. The whole town knows. The whole town knows you're a snake." Caleb's voice cut like a knife. "The whole town knows you cheated your own cousin out of his inheritance and threw his widow and children into the snow. The whole town knows what you are, Holloway. They're just too scared to say it." For a long moment no one moved. Then Victor smiled again, but it was different now. Sharper, more dangerous. "Very well, if that's how you want to play it." He turned his horse, gesturing for his men to follow. "But this isn't over, Callahan. Not by a long shot." "Get off my land," Caleb said. "And don't come back." Victor rode away without another word. Sheriff Garrett followed, refusing to meet Sarah's eyes. When they were gone, when the sound of hooves had faded into silence, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Caleb turned to face her, and Sarah was startled by the intensity in his eyes. "That man is a predator. He preys on people who can't fight back. I've watched him do it for years." His jaw clenched. "I should have stopped him long ago." "You couldn't have known. I knew enough." Caleb looked away toward the horizon where Victor had disappeared. I knew what he was, and I did nothing. Because it didn't concern me. Because it wasn't my problem. He shook his head. My father would be ashamed. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. She reached out, almost touching his arm, then stopped herself. You're helping now, she said quietly. That's what matters. Caleb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. He'll be back. With more men. More papers. More lies. I know. Are you scared? Sarah thought about it. Really thought about it. Yes, she admitted. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of letting that man control my life. She straightened her shoulders. If he wants a fight, I'll give him one. Caleb looked at her then. Really looked at her. And for the first time, Sarah saw something in his eyes that wasn't coldness or guardedness or pain. Admiration. You've got fire, he said. I'll give you that. I've got 5 children depending on me. Fire's all I've got left. Something shifted between them. Sarah felt it, a crack in the wall Caleb had built around himself. Small but real. Come inside, he said finally. It's getting cold, and you've got bread to finish. Sarah followed him into the house, and if her heart was beating faster than usual, she told herself it was just the adrenaline. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat by the fire in the cabin and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Caleb Callahan had defended her, had stood between her and Victor Holloway with a rifle in his hands and steel in his voice, had called Victor a snake to his face and dared him to do something about it. Why, I need help around the place. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. That's what he'd said. And Sarah had believed him. Had believed that his help was purely practical, purely transactional. But the look in his eyes today hadn't been practical. The anger in his voice hadn't been transactional. What kind of man would I be if I let children freeze? Maybe that was it. Maybe Caleb Callahan was simply a good man buried under years of grief and isolation. Maybe all that coldness was just armor, just protection against a world that had hurt him too many times. Or maybe she was fooling herself. Maybe she was seeing what she wanted to see because she was desperate and lonely and scared. The fire crackled. The wind whispered against the walls. In the bed behind her, her children slept on, oblivious to the dangers circling their fragile new home. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about tomorrow, about the work that needed doing, about the battle that was coming, about a man with gray eyes and gentle hands who had carried her out of a blizzard and given her hope when she'd had none left. Please, God, let me be right about him. Let him be who I think he is. It was the closest thing to prayer Sarah had managed in years. Emma's voice came out of the darkness, soft but clear. Mama. Sarah turned. Her daughter was sitting up in bed, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I thought you were asleep, sweetheart. I was pretending. Emma pushed back the covers and padded over to Sarah, settling on the floor beside her. I heard what happened today. Lucy told me. Of course she did. Sarah sighed. That girl hears everything. Is Victor going to take us away? Sarah pulled her daughter close. No, I won't let him. But he has men, and the sheriff, and we have Mr. Callahan. Sarah stroked Emma's hair. He stood up for us today, Emma. He told Victor to leave and never come back. Emma was quiet for a moment. Why? I don't know. Not entirely. Sarah pressed her lips to her daughter's head. But I think he might be a better man than he lets people see. Mama. Emma's voice was very small. Yes, baby. I don't want to move again. I like it here. The cabin is warm and there's food, and the horses are pretty, and... She trailed off. I don't want to lose another home. Sarah felt her heart crack open. I know, sweetheart. I don't either. They sat together in the firelight, mother and daughter, while the wind blew cold outside and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, Victor Holloway made plans that would change everything. But for now, for this one quiet moment, they were safe. And sometimes, Sarah thought safe was enough. In the main house, Caleb sat alone in the darkness, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He kept seeing Victor's face, that smug, satisfied smile, the casual cruelty of a man who'd thrown a woman and her children into a blizzard and expected no consequences. Caleb had known men like Victor in the war. Men who enjoyed power, who got pleasure from others' pain, who slept soundly at night no matter what they'd done. He'd killed men like that, had watched the life leave their eyes and felt nothing but relief that they couldn't hurt anyone else. Victor wasn't worth killing, not yet, but if he touched Sarah or those children... Caleb set down the glass, his hand trembling slightly. What am I doing? A week ago, his life had been simple. Empty, but simple. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. No complications, no connections. No one to worry about except Pete, and Pete could take care of himself. Now there was a woman in his cabin with fire in her eyes, and 5 children who looked at him like he might be something more than the broken man he knew himself to be. This is a mistake. Getting involved. Caring. It's all a mistake. But even as he thought it, Caleb knew he was past the point of no return. He'd drawn a line today, taken a stand, made an enemy of Victor Holloway. There was no going back now. He thought about Sarah's face when she'd thanked him, the way her eyes had softened, the way she'd almost touched his arm before catching herself. He thought about the little girl who'd called him Papa, and the way that single word had cracked something open inside him that he'd thought was dead forever. He thought about Emma's suspicious eyes, Grace's silent fear, Lucy's endless questions, Lily's demands for attention. 5 children. 5 small lives that now depended on him whether he'd agreed to it or not. Caleb dropped his head into his hands and let out a long, shuddering breath. I'm not ready for this. I'm not equipped for this. I don't know how to be what they need. But he thought of Sarah's words from that first night. I'm stronger than I look. Maybe strength wasn't about being ready. Maybe it was about showing up anyway, doing the next thing even when you didn't know what you were doing, fighting even when you thought you'd already lost. Caleb lifted his head and looked out the window toward the cabin where a thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney into the night sky. I'll protect them, whatever it takes, whatever it costs. It wasn't a promise to Sarah exactly. It wasn't even a promise to himself. It was something simpler than that, something deeper. It was a choice. And Caleb Callahan, for the first time in 8 years, felt like he had something worth fighting for. 2 weeks passed in something that almost felt like peace. Sarah fell into a rhythm, cooking, cleaning, mending, teaching the children their letters in the evenings by firelight. The cabin grew warmer with each passing day, filled with the sounds of small voices and smaller footsteps. Even Grace had started to relax her death grip on Rosie, loosening slightly her eyes, less haunted when she looked at the world around her. Caleb kept his distance. He ate the meals Sarah prepared, thanked her with brief nods, and retreated to whatever work needed doing. But Sarah noticed things. The way he'd pause at the window, sometimes watching the children play in the yard. The way his voice softened just barely when Lucy ambushed him with questions. The way he'd started leaving small things on the cabin porch, a bag of apples, a warm blanket, a carved wooden horse that appeared one morning with no explanation. He made that, Pete told her when she asked. Used to whittle all the time before the war. Haven't seen him touch a knife to wood in 8 years. Sarah had tucked that information away, turning it over in her mind like a stone in her pocket. The wall around Caleb Callahan was thick and high, but it wasn't impenetrable. There were cracks, small ones, places where light might eventually get through. Then Samuel got sick. It started with a cough, just a small thing barely noticeable. Sarah told herself it was nothing. Babies coughed. It happened. But by the second day, the cough had deepened. By the third, Samuel was burning with fever, his tiny body struggling for every breath. No. Sarah pressed her hand to his forehead, feeling the heat radiating off him. No, 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 not him. Please God, not him. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Mama, what's wrong with Samuel? Get Mr. Callahan. Sarah's voice came out sharp, brittle. Now, Emma, run! Emma ran. Sarah lifted Samuel from his cradle, holding him against her chest, feeling his labored breathing, the wheeze that accompanied each inhale. She'd heard that sound before. 2 years ago in the cabin on Thomas's ranch, when little Mary Beth Wilson from the neighboring farm had come down with the same thing. Mary Beth hadn't survived. Please, Sarah whispered, rocking Samuel. Please, baby. Fight. You have to fight. The door burst open. Caleb stood there still in his work clothes, his face taut with alarm. What happened? He's sick. Fever. His breathing. Sarah's voice broke. I think it's pneumonia. Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides. He looked at Samuel, really looked, and Sarah saw his jaw clench. How long? The cough started 2 days ago. The fever came this morning. I thought it was just... She stopped, shaking her head. I should have known sooner. I should have... Stop. Caleb's voice was firm, but not unkind. Blaming yourself won't help him. What does he need? Sarah forced herself to think, to push past the panic. Steam, to help him breathe. Cool cloths for the fever. I know some herbs, willow bark for the temperature, but I don't have... Pete keeps medicinal supplies in the main house. I'll get them. Caleb was already moving toward the door. What else? Prayer. Sarah's voice cracked. That's all I've got left. Caleb paused, one hand on the doorframe. He looked back at her, and for just a moment his mask slipped. Sarah saw fear in his eyes, real fear, raw and unguarded. He's going to make it, Caleb said. You hear me? That boy is going to make it. Then he was gone. The hours that followed blurred into a nightmare of steam and medicine and desperate prayer. Sarah sat by Samuel's cradle, never leaving his side, pressing cool cloths to his burning skin and dripping willow bark tea into his tiny mouth. The other children huddled in the corner of the cabin, silent and scared. Even Lucy had stopped asking questions. Caleb came and went, bringing supplies, checking on them, hovering in the doorway, like he wanted to help but didn't know how. Pete appeared with a pot of broth and instructions to eat, which Sarah ignored. Night fell. Samuel's breathing grew worse. He's not getting better. Sarah's voice was hollow. The medicine isn't working. He's not... Let me try something. Caleb stepped into the cabin, really stepped in, crossing the threshold he'd avoided for 2 weeks. He moved to where Sarah sat and crouched down beside her. My mother used to do this thing. When I was sick as a boy, she'd hold me against her chest, skin to skin, and rock me all night long. Said the warmth of another body was better than any medicine. Sarah stared at him. You want to hold him? I want to try. Caleb's voice was rough. If you'll let me. Sarah looked at her son, her tiny, struggling son, who'd never known his father and might not live to see tomorrow, and then at the man kneeling beside her. The man who'd said he didn't know anything about children. The man who'd avoided them for 2 weeks. The man who was now asking to hold her dying baby against his chest. Yes, she whispered. Please. Caleb unbuttoned his shirt and reached for Samuel with hands that trembled slightly. Sarah helped him position the baby against his bare chest, then wrapped a blanket around both of them. Samuel whimpered. Then slowly his breathing seemed to ease just slightly. That's it, Caleb murmured. That's it, little man. Just breathe, nice and easy. He began to rock slow and rhythmic, his big hands gentle on Samuel's tiny back. Sarah watched her heart in her throat as this cold, closed-off man cradled her son like something precious. You're doing good. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. You're a fighter, ain't you? Just like your mama. Don't you give up now. Don't you dare. Sarah felt tears slide down her cheeks. My mama held me like this when I had the croup. Caleb continued, his voice soft and distant. I don't remember it, but she told me later. Said I was so sick they didn't think I'd make it. But she held me for 3 days straight, and I pulled through. He pressed his lips to Samuel's damp hair. So you're going to pull through too. You hear me? That's an order. Emma had crept closer, her eyes fixed on Caleb. You're not doing it right, she said suddenly. Caleb looked up. What? The rocking. It's too fast. Emma moved to stand beside him. Samuel likes it slower, and you have to hum. He likes humming. I don't... Caleb stopped. I don't know any songs. I'll teach you one. Emma sat down cross-legged in front of him. Mama used to sing it to all of us. It goes like this. She began to hum a soft, simple melody that Sarah recognized immediately. A lullaby. The lullaby she'd sung to each of her children since they were born. Caleb listened, then began to hum along, his deep voice, rough and uncertain. Emma nodded encouragingly, adjusting his rhythm when he got it wrong, and slowly, so slowly, Sarah almost missed it. The tension in her daughter's shoulders began to ease. You're doing better now, Emma said finally. Keep going. Caleb kept going. The night stretched on, endless and dark. Sarah dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake every time Samuel's breathing changed. But Caleb never stopped rocking, never stopped humming, never let go of the baby in his arms. Sometime after midnight, Pete appeared with coffee. He took one look at the scene, Caleb holding Samuel. Emma curled up beside them, the other children sleeping in a pile on the bed, and his weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Well, I'll be, he said quietly. He's still fighting, Caleb said. His voice was hoarse. Fever's still high, but he's fighting. Course he is. Pete set down the coffee and lowered himself into a chair. Boy's got his mama's spirit. He ain't giving up. Sarah reached for the coffee, wrapping her cold hands around the warm cup. How did you know? Pete raised an eyebrow. Know what? That Caleb would. She gestured at the scene before her. That he could do this. Be this. Pete was quiet for a long moment. His eyes went to Caleb, who was focused entirely on Samuel, still humming that soft lullaby. I've known that boy since he was born, Pete said finally. Watched him grow up. Watched him go off to war. Watched him come back different. He shook his head. The war broke something in him, something important. He came home with dead eyes and a heart full of ghosts. Buried his parents within the year. Stopped talking, stopped feeling, stopped living. Sarah felt her throat tighten. What happened to him in the war? That ain't my story to tell. Pete's voice was gentle but firm. But I'll tell you this much. Caleb Callahan ain't a cold man. He's a hurt man. There's a difference. Sarah looked at Caleb, still rocking her son, still humming, his face soft in the firelight. I know, she said quietly. I think I've known since the first night. Pete nodded slowly. He needs this, he said. Needs you and those young'uns more than he knows. 8 years he's been dying by inches in that big empty house. 8 years of punishing himself for things that weren't his fault. He met Sarah's eyes. You came along at just the right time, Mrs. Holloway. Like God himself sent you. Sarah, she corrected automatically. Just Sarah. Pete smiled. Sarah, then. You take care of that boy, you hear? He acts tough, but he's fragile. Been broken too many times to trust that anything good will last. I'll take care of him, Sarah said. And as she said it, she realized she meant it. Not just as an employer, not just as the man who'd given her shelter. Something more. Something she wasn't ready to name. Pete stood, his old bones creaking. I'll be in the main house if you need me. And Sarah. Yes. That baby's going to make it. I can feel it in my bones. Sarah wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. Dawn came gray and cold. Sarah had finally fallen asleep, her head resting against the wall when Emma's voice woke her. Mama! Mama! Wake up! Sarah jerked awake, her heart slamming against her ribs. What? What is it? Is he? He's awake. Emma was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Samuel's awake. Mama. Look. Sarah scrambled to her feet and rushed to where Caleb still sat. Samuel still cradled against his chest. But something was different. The baby's eyes were open, clear alert, focusing on Caleb's face with that intense concentration babies sometimes showed. His fever broke about an hour ago, Caleb said. His voice was raw from the night of humming. He's been looking at me like this ever since. Sarah pressed her hand to Samuel's forehead. Cool. Not cold, but cool. The dangerous heat was gone. Oh, thank God. She sank to her knees beside them, her whole body shaking with relief. Thank God. Thank God. Samuel made a sound, not a whimper or a cry, but something closer to a coo. His tiny hand reached up and wrapped around Caleb's finger. Caleb went very still. He's holding on to you, Emma said, her voice full of wonder. He never does that with strangers. I'm not. Caleb stopped. He looked down at the baby in his arms, at the tiny fingers wrapped around his own, and something cracked in his expression. Something broke open. His eyes filled with tears. Sarah had never seen him cry, hadn't even known he could. But here he was, this hard, cold, broken man crying silently while a 6-month-old baby held his finger. I've got you, Caleb whispered. I've got you, little man. You're safe now. I've got you. Emma was watching with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Then slowly she reached out and placed her hand on Caleb's arm. Thank you, she said quietly, for saving my brother. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw the moment something shifted between them. The wall of suspicion Emma had built wasn't gone, but there was a crack in it now, a small one, but real. He saved himself, Caleb said. I just held on. That's what matters. Emma's voice was fierce. You held on. You didn't let go. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then very carefully, he freed his finger from Samuel's grip and held out his hand to Emma. Neither did you, he said. You stayed up all night, taught me that song, didn't give up on him for a second. Emma looked at his outstretched hand. Sarah held her breath. Then Emma took it. Just for a moment. Just a quick squeeze before she let go and stepped back. But it was enough. The other children woke one by one, drawn by the commotion. Lucy demanded to know everything that had happened. Grace crept close enough to touch Samuel's cheek, then retreated to her corner with Rosie. Lily climbed into Sarah's lap and fell back asleep immediately. Through it all, Caleb sat quietly. Samuel still resting against his chest, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but his expression different, lighter. Like a weight had been lifted that he'd carried so long, he'd forgotten it was there. You should get some rest, Sarah said finally. You were up all night. So were you. I'm used to it. Mothers don't sleep. Caleb shook his head. You need to take care of yourself. Can't pour from an empty cup. Did Pete teach you that? My mother. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She said it all the time, usually when she was running herself ragged taking care of everyone else. Sarah felt a sudden fierce ache of longing. For her own mother dead these many years. For Thomas, who would never see his children grow. For all the family she'd lost and could never get back. You must miss her, she said, your mother. Every day. Caleb's voice was quiet. She was the best woman I ever knew. Kind, strong, fierce when she needed to be. He looked down at Samuel. She'd have loved these young'uns, would have spoiled them rotten. She raised a good son. Caleb's jaw tightened. I ain't good. Done things that'd make your hair curl. Things I can't ever take back. In the war. He nodded slowly. Pete said it broke something in you." Caleb was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I killed a boy. Couldn't have been more than 16. He came running at me out of the smoke and I shot him before I even saw his face. He fell at my feet and looked up at me and called for his mother." Caleb's hands were shaking. "He died calling for his mother, and I just stood there. Couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Just watched him die." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "That wasn't your fault," she said. "It was war. He was trying to kill you." "Maybe. Maybe not. He was just a scared kid with a gun." Caleb shook his head. "After that, something in me just stopped. Like a clock that quits ticking. I kept fighting because that's all I knew how to do. But I wasn't really there anymore. Haven't been really here since." He looked at her, then his gray eyes raw with pain. "Until now." Sarah's breath caught. "These past 2 weeks," Caleb continued. "Your children running around making noise, asking questions. You in my kitchen cooking meals, making the place feel like home again. I've felt more alive than I have in 8 years." He swallowed hard. "And tonight, holding this baby, feeling him fight, watching him choose to live, I remembered something I'd forgotten." "What?" "That good things exist, that life can be beautiful, that maybe—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "Maybe I'm not too broken to be part of it." Sarah reached out and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm from holding Samuel all night, his fingers rough with calluses. "You're not too broken," she said. "None of us are. We're all just cracked in different places trying to hold ourselves together." Caleb turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. It was the first time he'd really touched her. The first time he'd chosen to close the distance instead of keeping it. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Family, children, caring about people. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except what you are. What I am is a mess." "So am I." Sarah squeezed his hand. "So are my children. We're all messes. But maybe messes can fit together. Maybe we can be messy together." Caleb let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's the strangest thing anyone's ever said to me." "Get used to it. I say strange things all the time." For a moment, just a moment, he smiled. A real smile. Full and genuine. It transformed his whole face, made him look younger, softer, like the man he might have been before the war took everything good from him. "I want to try," he said. "Being part of this. Whatever this is. I can't promise I won't mess it up. Can't promise I won't shut down or push you away or do something stupid. But I want to try." Sarah felt her heart swell until she thought it might burst. "That's all I'm asking," she said. "That's all any of us can do." Samuel chose that moment to let out a small, demanding cry, the healthy cry of a hungry baby who'd decided he was done being sick and ready for breakfast. Caleb looked down at him, startled. "I think he wants his mama. I think he wants food." Sarah reached for her son, lifting him carefully from Caleb's arms. "Thank you. For everything. For staying up all night. For not giving up." "I told you." Caleb stood slowly, his body stiff from hours of sitting. "He saved himself. I just held on." Sometimes, holding on is the bravest thing a person can do. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something burning in his eyes. "I'm starting to understand that," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked out of the cabin into the gray morning light, leaving Sarah with her children and a heart that was full to overflowing. Emma watched him go, her expression thoughtful. "Mama." "Yes, baby. I think maybe I was wrong about him." Sarah smiled, tears still wet on her cheeks. "I think maybe we all were." "He cried," Emma said. "When Samuel held his finger, I saw it. I saw it too. Papa never cried. Even when he was dying, he didn't cry." Sarah pulled her daughter close with her free arm. Some men think crying is weakness, but it's not. It takes strength to feel things, to let other people see you feel things. Your papa was strong in his own way, but Mr. Callahan, he's learning to be strong in a different way. Emma was quiet for a moment. I like him, she said finally. I don't trust him yet, but I like him. That's a start, Sarah said. That's a good start. Outside, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The storm had passed, and the world was waking up to a new day. And in a small cabin on a Wyoming ranch, a family that wasn't yet a family began to take shape, built from broken pieces and stubborn hope, and a love that none of them had expected to find. The days after Samuel's recovery brought a shift that everyone felt, but no one named. Caleb started taking his meals in the cabin instead of the main house. He'd sit at the end of the small table, awkward and too big for the space, while Lucy peppered him with questions, and Lily tried to climb into his lap, and Grace watched from behind Sarah's skirt with those quiet, measuring eyes. Emma remained cautious, but something had changed in her since that night. She no longer glared at Caleb when he entered a room. Sometimes she even answered his questions with more than one word. She's coming around, Pete observed one afternoon, watching Emma help Caleb carry firewood to the cabin. Never thought I'd see the day. She saw something in him that night. Sarah was mending one of Caleb's shirts, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Something real, something she could trust. What about you? Pete's voice was gentle. What did you see? Sarah's hand stilled on the fabric. She thought about Caleb holding Samuel against his chest, about the tears in his eyes when her son grabbed his finger, about the way he'd said I want to try, like it was the hardest and bravest thing he'd ever done. I saw a man worth believing in, she said quietly. Pete nodded, a knowing look in his old eyes. Thought so. The peace lasted 3 more days. Caleb was checking the fence line in the north pasture when he saw them coming. 3 riders moving fast, their horses kicking up snow as they approached. He recognized the lead rider immediately, one of Victor's hired men, the big one with the scar across his jaw. Caleb reached for his rifle, but he wasn't fast enough. The first blow came from behind a 4th rider he hadn't seen. Something hard connected with the back of his skull, and the world went white with pain. He hit the ground tasting blood, and then they were on him. Mr. Holloway sends his regards, the scarred man said, driving his boot into Caleb's ribs. Says to tell you this is what happens to men who stick their noses where they don't belong. Caleb tried to get up. A boot caught him in the face. He also says the woman belongs to him. Her and those brats. You can't protect them forever, Callahan. Sooner or later we're going to take what's ours. Another kick. Another. Caleb felt something crack in his chest, a rib, maybe 2. The pain was white-hot blinding. You tell her, the scarred man said, leaning down close enough that Caleb could smell the tobacco on his breath. Tell her Victor's coming, and when he does, there won't be a damn thing you can do about it. Then they were gone, horses thundering away across the frozen ground, leaving Caleb lying in the snow with blood on his face and fire in his chest. He lay there for a long time. The cold seeped through his clothes, numbed his skin, but he couldn't move. Every breath was agony, every thought scattered like smoke. Sarah. Her name cut through the fog in his mind. Sarah. The children. They were alone at the ranch. If Victor's men came there, Caleb forced himself to his hands and knees. The world spun. Blood dripped from his split lip, making red holes in the white snow. Get up. Get up, damn you. They need you. He got up. The walk back to the ranch took forever. Each step sent jolts of pain through his broken ribs. His vision kept graying at the edges, threatening to pull him under. But he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, again. He was maybe 50 yards from the main house when his legs finally gave out. Caleb! Sarah's voice sharp with fear. Running footsteps. Then she was there, her hands on his face, her eyes wide with horror. Oh God! Oh God, what happened? Who did this? Victor's men. The words came out slurred, wrong. 4 of them. They said he's coming. For you. For the children. Don't talk. Save your strength. Sarah was pulling at him, trying to get him up. Pete. Pete, help me. More footsteps. Pete's weathered face appearing above him. Strong hands lifting him, half carrying him toward the house. Get him inside. I'll get the medical supplies. The children are in the cabin. Emma's with them. They're safe. Safe. The word wrapped around Caleb like a blanket. They're safe. Then the darkness took him. He woke to pain. Not the sharp, immediate pain of the beating, but a deeper ache that seemed to radiate from every bone in his body. He tried to move and gasped as his ribs protested. Don't! Sarah's voice close by. Her hand on his chest, gentle but firm. You've got at least 2 broken ribs, maybe 3. Moving will only make it worse. Caleb forced his eyes open. He was in his bed, in his room in the main house. Sarah sat beside him, a basin of water and bloody cloths on the table nearby. How long? His voice came out rough, barely recognizable. 6 hours. You lost a lot of blood. Scared me half to death. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. When I saw you fall. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just don't. She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. Just don't die. Please, I can't lose anyone else. Caleb reached up, ignoring the pain, and touched her face. His fingers came away wet. I ain't dying, he said. Takes more than a few kicks to put me down. You're a terrible liar. I'm an excellent liar. Ask anyone. She laughed, but it came out more like a sob. This isn't funny, Caleb. They could have killed you. They almost did. But they didn't. He caught her hand, held it against his chest. They wanted to send a message. If they'd wanted me dead, I'd be dead. What message? Caleb's jaw tightened. That Victor's done playing games. He's coming for you, Sarah. For real this time. Sarah's face went pale, but her voice stayed steady. Let him come. I'm not afraid of him. You should be. He's dangerous. So am I. Her eyes met his, fierce and burning. I've got 5 children depending on me. 5 children who've already lost their father. I'm not going to let that snake take anything else from them. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd collapsed in the snow begging for help just weeks ago, who now sat before him with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes, and felt something twist in his chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs. I know, he said quietly. I know you're dangerous, but you don't have to face him alone. I know that too. Sarah's voice softened. I've got you. I've got you. 3 words. Simple. Ordinary. But they hit Caleb like a bullet to the heart. Sarah. Rest. She stood, pulling her hand from his. We'll figure out what to do about Victor tomorrow. Right now, you need to heal. Stay. The word came out before he could stop it. Please. Just for a while. Sarah hesitated. Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty maybe, or something warmer. Then she sat back down and took his hand in hers. All right, she said. I'll stay. Caleb closed his eyes. The pain was still there, but it seemed duller now, more distant. Sarah's hand was warm in his, her presence a comfort he hadn't known he needed. Tell me about Thomas, he said. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. What kind of man was he? He was good. Sarah's voice went soft, distant. Kind. Gentle. He worked hard, but he always made time for the children. Used to read to them every night before bed. Emma was his favorite, don't tell the others, but he loved them all. How'd you meet? He came through Ohio looking for work. Ended up at my father's schoolhouse asking for directions. I was 17. He was 22. I thought he was the handsomest man I'd ever seen. She laughed quietly. I was so shy I could barely look at him. But he kept coming back. Made up excuses to need more directions. Finally, my father just told him to ask me to dinner already. And he did? He did. We were married 6 months later. My father officiated. It was the happiest day of my life. Caleb listened to the love in her voice, the grief beneath it, and felt something like jealousy mixed with admiration. Jealousy that another man had known this woman first, had earned her love, and given her children. Admiration that she could speak of him with such tenderness, even now. He was a lucky man, Caleb said. We both were, for a while. Sarah's hand tightened on his. But then the fever came, and he was gone, and I had to figure out how to keep going without him. Some days I still don't know how I manage it. You manage it because you're strong. Strongest woman I've ever met. Sarah looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't feel strong. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding on. That's what strength is. Caleb turned his head to look at her fully. Holding on when everything's falling apart. Getting up when you'd rather stay down. Fighting when you've got nothing left to fight with. He squeezed her hand. You do that every single day, Sarah. For your children. For yourself. That's stronger than any soldier I ever knew. Sarah didn't say anything. She just looked at him with those green eyes, and something passed between them. Something Caleb couldn't name, but felt in every broken bone. Then she leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It was tender, gentle, the kind of kiss you'd give a child or a friend. But it burned through Caleb like wildfire, leaving him breathless and wanting and terrified all at once. Sleep, Sarah whispered against his skin. I'll be here when you wake up. Caleb slept. The attack changed things. It took Caleb a week to get back on his feet, and even then, he moved slowly, carefully, his broken ribs a constant reminder of how close he'd come to never getting up again. Sarah fussed over him in a way that made him uncomfortable and secretly pleased. The children visited daily, Lucy telling him stories, Lily bringing him drawings, Grace leaving small gifts on his nightstand, a pretty stone, a feather, a wildflower she'd found growing despite the cold. Emma brought him books. Mama said you like to read, she said, setting a small stack on his bed. These were your mother's. I hope you don't mind that I looked at them. I don't mind. Caleb picked up the top volume, a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress. This was her favorite. Mine too. Emma hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the bed. She wrote things in the margins. Did you know that? I knew. It's like she's still here, kind of, talking to us through the words. Emma's voice went soft. I wish I had something like that from my papa. Something with his voice in it. Caleb understood that longing, the desperate need to hold on to something, anything of the people you'd lost. What do you remember about him? He asked. Everything. Emma's eyes filled with tears. His laugh, his hands, he had big hands like yours, the way he smelled after working in the barn, the way he used to pick me up and spin me around until I was dizzy. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I try to remember every day so I don't forget. But sometimes I can't see his face anymore, and it scares me. That's normal. Caleb's voice was gentle. The details fade over time, but the feeling stays. The love stays. Do you still remember your parents? Bits and pieces. My mother's laugh. My father's handshake. The way the house smelled when she was baking bread. Caleb smiled sadly. It's been 8 years. A lot's faded, but I still feel them sometimes when I'm in certain rooms or doing certain things, like they're still here watching over me. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said very softly, Do you think my papa's watching over us? I think he'd be proud of you, all of you, the way you've taken care of your mama and your sisters and your brother, the way you haven't given up even when everything was hard. Emma's lower lip trembled. I miss him so much. I know, sweetheart. I know. She broke then, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling over. Caleb reached out slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away, and she didn't. She leaned into him, her small body shaking with sobs, and Caleb held her the way he'd held Samuel that long night, rocking gently, murmuring soft words that didn't mean anything except, "I'm here. You're not alone. It's okay to cry." When Sarah came in an hour later, she found them both asleep. Emma curled against Caleb's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her. The book of poetry lay open on the bed between them, and Sarah saw tears dried on both their faces. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching them breathe together, and felt something in her heart crack wide open. Victor made his move 3 days later. It happened fast. So fast that later Sarah would struggle to piece together the sequence of events. The children were playing in the yard, Lucy and Lily building snowmen, Emma watching from the porch, Grace sitting alone by the fence with Rosie. Sarah was inside with Samuel Caleb resting in the main house, Pete gone to town for supplies. Then the wagon came. Victor Holloway drove it himself, his fine clothes looking out of place against the rough wooden seat. He pulled up to the fence, tipped his hat at Emma with that oily smile and said, "Afternoon, little lady. Your mama around?" Emma's face went white. "You're not welcome here." Now. That ain't very hospitable. I just came to talk. No harm in talking." Sarah appeared in the cabin doorway, Samuel on her hip. "Get away from my daughter, Victor." Sarah. Victor's smile widened. "There you are. You're looking well. Country life suits you." "I said get away. This is Callahan property. You have no right to be here." "Actually, I have every right." Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "See this? It's a warrant. For your arrest. Signed by the judge himself. That warrant is based on lies and you know it." Maybe not. Point is, the law's on my side. And the law says you owe me money. Money you're going to pay back one way or another." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Oh, I ain't asking you to come with me. Not today." Victor's eyes slid sideways toward the fence. Toward Grace, sitting alone with her doll, frozen with fear. "I'm taking collateral." Before Sarah could scream, Victor was off the wagon and moving. He grabbed Grace, scooping her up despite her struggles, and had her on the wagon seat before Sarah could take 3 steps. "Grace!" "No, let her go." "Mama!" Grace's scream was high and terrified. "Mama, help!" "This is just insurance," Victor called, whipping the horses into motion. "You come to town tomorrow, bring the money you owe, and maybe you'll get your little girl back." Sarah ran. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, but the wagon was too fast, pulling away from her with every second, carrying her daughter into the gray distance. "Grace! Grace!" She fell to her knees in the snow, screaming her daughter's name until her voice broke. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Coming from behind her. Fast. Caleb rode past her like a man possessed, hunched over his horse, despite his broken ribs pushing the animal faster than Sarah had ever seen anyone ride. He didn't slow down, didn't look back. Just rode, closing the distance between himself and the wagon with terrifying speed. Sarah watched, her heart in her throat, as Caleb gained on Victor. Watched as he pulled alongside the wagon. Watched as he launched himself from his horse onto the seat. Watched as he and Victor went down in a tangle of limbs. The wagon veered wildly, then stopped. Sarah started running again. By the time she reached them, it was over. Caleb had Victor pinned to the ground, one hand around his throat, the other drawn back in a fist. His face was twisted with rage, his broken ribs forgotten, every muscle in his body coiled for violence. "Give me one reason," he growled. "One reason not to kill you where you lie." Victor's face was purple, his eyes bulging. "The law, the sheriff." "The sheriff ain't here." Caleb's grip tightened. "It's just you and me and God, and I don't think any of us are feeling merciful." "Caleb." Sarah's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Caleb, let him go." He took Grace. He put his hands on a child. Our child. Our child. The words hit Sarah like a thunderbolt, but she pushed past them. I know, but if you kill him, they'll hang you. And then what happens to us? She knelt beside him, placed her hand on his arm. Let the law handle him. Please, Caleb, let him go. For a long moment, Caleb didn't move. His whole body vibrated with the desire to squeeze to end it, to make sure Victor Holloway never threatened anyone again. Then he released his grip and stood up, stepping back, his hands shaking. Victor gasped, coughing, rolling onto his side. You're done, Caleb said, his voice cold as the snow around them. You hear me? Done. You come near this family again, I won't stop. I don't care about the law. I don't care about hanging. I'll put you in the ground and sleep like a baby after. Victor stared up at him with hate-filled eyes, but he didn't speak. Couldn't speak. Get out of here, and tell your hired men to find new employment, because if I see them on my land again, they'll get worse than a beating. Victor stumbled to his feet, clutched his throat, and ran. Actually ran, leaving his wagon and horses behind, fleeing across the frozen ground like the coward he was. Sarah didn't watch him go. She was already climbing onto the wagon, reaching for Grace, pulling her daughter into her arms and holding her so tight she could feel the little girl's heartbeat against her own. Mama! Grace's voice was muffled against Sarah's shoulder. Mama, I was so scared. I know, baby. I know. But you're safe now. You're safe. Grace pulled back slightly, her tear-stained face, looking past Sarah to where Caleb stood bloody and battered and breathing hard. The man saved me, she whispered. The quiet man. He came on the horse like a knight. Caleb looked uncomfortable. I ain't no knight. You are. Grace's voice was small but certain. Knights save people. That's what you did. She reached out her arms and Caleb froze. She wants you to hold her, Sarah said softly. I'm all bloody. She doesn't care. Caleb hesitated for one more moment. Then he stepped forward and took Grace from Sarah's arms, holding her against his chest, the same way he'd held Samuel that long night. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving me. And Caleb Callahan, who hadn't cried in 8 years until a baby grabbed his finger, felt tears sliding down his cheeks for the second time in a month. You're welcome, little one, he said. You're welcome. That night, after Grace was asleep with her sisters, after the story had been told and retold until everyone understood what had happened, after Pete had returned from town with news that Victor had fled and the sheriff was finally asking questions. After all of that, Sarah found Caleb on the porch of the main house, staring out at the darkness. She sat down beside him without speaking. They were quiet for a long time. Then Caleb said, I would have killed him. I know. I wanted to kill him. Wanted it more than I've wanted anything in a long time. I know that too. Caleb turned to look at her. Doesn't that scare you, knowing what I'm capable of? Sarah thought about it. Really thought about it. No, she said finally. Because I know why you wanted to kill him. Not for yourself, for Grace, for the children, for me. She reached over and took his hand. There's a difference between a man who hurts people because he enjoys it and a man who'd kill to protect the people he loves. Victor is the first kind. You're the second. The people he loves, Caleb repeated quietly. Yes. He was silent for a moment. Then he turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I called them ours, he said. When I was talking to Victor, I said our child. I heard. I didn't mean to. It just came out. But... He swallowed hard. I think I meant it. I think somewhere along the way they became mine. Not because I have any right to them. Not because I'm trying to take Thomas's place. But because... He trailed off, shaking his head. Because you love them, Sarah finished. Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't know if I know how to love. Not properly. Not the way they deserve. You held Samuel all night to keep him alive. You let Emma cry on your shoulder. You rode after Grace with broken ribs because you couldn't stand the thought of her being scared. Sarah squeezed his hand. That's love, Caleb. That's exactly what love looks like. He turned to face her fully, and in the starlight, his eyes were bright with emotion. What about you? He asked. Do I love you too? Sarah felt her heart stop beating. Do you? Caleb reached up and touched her face, his rough fingers gentle against her cheek. I don't know, he said honestly. I know that when I see you, something in my chest gets tight. I know that when you smile, the world seems less dark. I know that when you're not around, I count the minutes until you come back. He paused. Is that love? I think it might be. Then yes. His voice dropped to a whisper. I think I love you, Sarah. I think I've loved you since you fell to your knees in my yard and begged me to save your children. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. Caleb, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know. But Sarah didn't want to be silent. Didn't want to let this moment pass without telling him the truth that had been growing in her heart for weeks. I loved Thomas, she said. He was my first love, my children's father, and I'll carry him with me for the rest of my life. She took a breath. But I think my heart is bigger than I knew. I think there's room in it for more than one person. And I think... Her voice broke. I think you found your way in there, Caleb Callahan. Somehow, despite everything. Caleb stared at her. You mean? I mean I love you too, not instead of Thomas. Alongside him. A different kind of love, but just as real. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, gentle, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Sarah was crying, but she was also smiling. What happens now? She whispered. Caleb touched his forehead to hers. Now we figure it out together. You and me and 5 children who somehow became ours. That sounds complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Sarah laughed through her tears. When did you become so wise? About 10 minutes ago. Caleb smiled that real full smile she'd only seen once before. I'm still catching up. They sat together on the porch, hands intertwined as the stars wheeled overhead and the night wrapped around them like a promise. Somewhere inside the house, Pete watched from the window and smiled. About damn time, he muttered to himself. About damn time. The news of Victor's arrest spread through town like wildfire. Sheriff Garrett had finally done what everyone knew he should have done months ago. He'd investigated. He dug into the forged documents, the bribed officials, the trail of lies and corruption that Victor had left behind. And what he'd found was enough to put Victor Holloway behind bars for a very long time. Sarah heard the news from Pete, who'd ridden into town for supplies, and come back with a grin splitting his weathered face. They got him, Pete announced, bursting into the cabin, where Sarah was teaching the children their letters. Victor Holloway's in jail. Sheriff says the judge is coming next week, and there ain't a lawyer in the territory willing to defend him. Sarah felt her legs go weak. She sat down heavily, her hand pressed to her chest. It's over. Her voice came out barely a whisper. It's really over. It's really over. Pete's voice softened. You're free, Sarah. You and those young'uns. Victor can't hurt you no more. Emma looked up from her slate, her eyes wide. Does that mean we don't have to be scared anymore? That's exactly what it means, little miss. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lucy let out a whoop of joy and threw her arms around Grace. Lily started bouncing up and down, not entirely sure what was happening, but caught up in the excitement. Even Samuel in his cradle by the fire seemed to sense the shift in the air. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. 2 years. 2 years of running, of hiding, of looking over her shoulder at every sound. 2 years of fear so constant it had become part of her, woven into her bones. And now it was over. "Where's Caleb?" she managed. "Main house. I expect he's heard by now." Pete's eyes twinkled. "Might want to go tell him yourself, though. Some news is better delivered in person." Sarah was out the door before he finished speaking. She found Caleb on the porch, staring out at nothing, his hands shoved in his pockets. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the look on his face told her he already knew. "Pete told you," he said. "Pete told me." Sarah stopped at the bottom of the steps, suddenly uncertain. "It's over, Caleb. Victor's in jail. They found the forged documents. Everything he stole, the ranch, the cattle, the money, it's going to be returned to me." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's good. That's real good." Something in his voice made Sarah's heart clench. He wasn't happy. He should have been happy. Why wasn't he happy? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Caleb." Sarah climbed the steps and stood in front of him. "Look at me." He did finally, and she saw it then, the fear behind the careful blankness. The fear she'd come to recognize over the past weeks. "You think I'm going to leave?" she said. His jaw tightened. "You've got your ranch back, your home, everything that was stolen from you. Why would you stay here?" "Because this is my home now." Sarah reached up and touched his face, forcing him to look at her. "Because my children are happy here. Because Pete needs someone to fuss over, and that cabin needs someone living in it, and this grumpy, stubborn, wonderful man needs someone to love him." "Sarah." "I'm not leaving, Caleb. I told you that weeks ago, and I meant it. Getting my ranch back doesn't change anything. Well, it changes one thing." She smiled through her tears. "It means I'm not poor anymore. It means I can contribute to this partnership instead of just taking from it." Caleb stared at her. "You'd really stay even though you don't have to." "I want to stay. There's a difference." "But your ranch, Thomas's ranch, can be sold, or rented out, or managed by someone who actually knows what they're doing." Sarah shook her head. "I never wanted to run a cattle ranch, Caleb. Thomas was the rancher, not me. I just want a home, a family, someone to build a life with." She took a breath. "I want you." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I thought you'd go," he admitted against her hair. "Thought once you had options you'd realize you could do better than a broken man on a lonely ranch." "You're not broken." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "You're healing. We both are. And we're going to keep healing together." Caleb kissed her, then not the gentle, questioning kiss from before, but something deeper, fiercer. A promise and a claim all wrapped up together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sarah laughed. "Well," she said, "I suppose this means we're courting now." Caleb's lips twitched. "Reckon it does." "Pete's going to be insufferable." "Pete's been insufferable since the day you arrived. This won't change much." From inside the house they heard Pete's voice. "I heard that." Sarah laughed again, and this time Caleb joined her. A real laugh, full and free, the sound of a man who'd finally found something worth being happy about. The weeks that followed were the happiest Sarah had known in years. With Victor gone and the threat lifted, life on the Callahan ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children thrived, growing stronger and louder, and more confident with each passing day. Even Grace had started speaking more, her quiet voice emerging from behind the walls she'd built around herself. Caleb was changing too. The coldness that had defined him when Sarah first arrived was thawing, replaced by something warmer. He spent more time with the children, teaching Lucy to ride, helping Emma with her studies, carrying Lily on his shoulders when she demanded, "Up." He'd even started carving again, producing a steady stream of wooden animals that the children fought over and treasured. But it was his relationship with Grace that surprised Sarah the most. The quiet girl who'd barely spoken for months had attached herself to Caleb like a shadow. She followed him everywhere, sat beside him at meals, fell asleep in his lap during evening stories. And Caleb, who'd sworn he didn't know anything about children, handled her with a gentleness that made Sarah's heart ache. "She feels safe with you," Sarah told him one evening, watching Grace doze against his shoulder. "She's never felt safe with anyone except me." "I don't know why." Caleb's voice was soft, careful not to wake the sleeping child. "I ain't done anything special. You saved her. You rode after her when no one else could. You held Victor by the throat and told him you'd kill him if he ever touched her again." Sarah smiled. "To a scared little girl, that's everything. I meant it, you know. I would have killed him." "I know. That's why she trusts you." Sarah reached over and touched his hand. "You'd do anything to protect her. Protect all of them. She can feel it." Caleb looked down at Grace, her small face peaceful in sleep, and something shifted in his expression. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family, children, someone to come home to." He shook his head. "After the war, after my parents died, I figured that part of my life was over. Figured I'd spend the rest of my days alone, just waiting to die. And now I can't imagine going back to that." He met Sarah's eyes. "You changed everything you know. You and these young'uns. You walked into my life and turned it upside down, and I'm grateful for every minute of it." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Caleb Callahan, are you getting sentimental on me?" "Don't tell Pete. He'll never let me hear the end of it." She laughed, but the sound caught in her throat when Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and glinting. A ring, simple gold worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's," Caleb said. "My father gave it to her the day they married. She wore it every day of her life until the fever took her." He turned it over in his fingers. "I've been carrying it around for 8 years not knowing what to do with it, but now I think I know." Sarah's heart stopped beating. "I ain't good with words," Caleb continued, his voice rough. "Never have been. But I know how I feel. I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want to see is your face. I know that when something good happens, you're the first person I want to tell. I know that those children in that cabin have become mine in every way that matters. And I can't imagine a future that doesn't have all of you in it." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Sarah Jane Holloway, will you marry me?" Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at this man, this wonderful, broken, healing man, who'd opened his door to her in a blizzard and somehow become the center of her world. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Caleb. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and then he was kissing her again, and Grace was stirring between them, and somewhere in the cabin, Lucy was yelling that she'd seen the whole thing through the window. "You're getting married!" Lucy shouted, bursting onto the porch with her sisters in tow. "Mama and Mr. Callahan are getting married." "Is it true?" Emma appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes bright. "Are you really?" Sarah held up her hand, showing the ring. "It's true." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she walked across the porch, stood in front of Caleb, and looked up at him with those two old eyes. "Are you going to be our papa now?" she asked. Caleb knelt down so he was at eye level with her. "I'd like to be if you'll have me. I know I can't replace your real papa. I wouldn't try. But I'd like to be something to you, something good." Emma considered this. "What would we call you?" "Whatever you want. Mr. Callahan, Caleb, Pa, Papa. I'll answer to any of it." "Papa Caleb," Lucy said immediately. "Like how Lily says it." "Papa Caleb." Emma repeated slowly, testing the words. Then so softly, Sarah almost missed it. "I think I'd like that." Caleb's eyes went bright. He opened his arms, and Emma stepped into them, letting him hold her for the first time since that night after Samuel's illness. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "For saving Grace. For saving Samuel. For saving all of us." "You saved me right back," Caleb said. "Every single one of you." The wedding was held on the first day of spring. It was a simple ceremony, held in the yard of the Callahan Ranch, with the mountains rising up behind them, and the first wildflowers beginning to push through the melting snow. Reverend Whitmore came out from town to officiate, and the handful of neighbors who'd stood by Sarah during the dark times came to witness. Sarah wore her best dress altered and cleaned until it looked almost new. Caleb wore his father's suit taken out of storage and brushed free of dust for the first time in years. The children stood beside them, all 5 of them scrubbed and shining their faces bright with joy. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Whitmore began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Caleb James Callahan and Sarah Jane Holloway." Sarah barely heard the words. She was too busy looking at Caleb, at the way his eyes never left her face, at the slight tremor in his hands as he held hers. This man who'd been dead inside for 8 years, who'd built walls so high no one could climb them, who'd sworn he didn't know how to love. Here he was standing in front of God, and everyone promising to spend the rest of his life with her. "Do you, Caleb James Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain. "And do you, Sarah Jane Holloway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Whitmore smiled. "You may kiss the bride." Caleb kissed her softly, reverently, and the children cheered, and Pete wiped his eyes with his handkerchief when he thought no one was looking. "There's one more thing," Caleb said when the cheering died down. He turned to the children, all 5 of them, watching with curious eyes. "I asked your mama to marry me, and she said yes. But I'd like to ask you something too." He knelt down, putting himself at their level. "I know I'm not your real papa. I know I can never take his place, and I wouldn't want to. But I love you, all of you, and I'd like to be your family if you'll let me. Not just your mama's husband. Your papa too." Lucy didn't hesitate. "Yes." She threw herself at him, nearly knocking him over. Grace followed, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing her face against his shoulder. Lily toddled forward and planted herself in his lap. "Papa," she announced, like it was already decided. Emma hung back, her expression unreadable. Sarah felt her heart clench. Then Emma stepped forward, took a breath, and said, "My real papa would have liked you. He would have been glad Mama found someone to take care of us." She paused. "I'm glad too." Caleb reached out his hand. Emma took it, and then she was part of the embrace too. All 5 children piled on top of the man who'd become their father. Sarah watched with tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her heart. "Well," Pete said, appearing at her elbow, "I'd say that's about the prettiest thing I've ever seen." "It is," Sarah agreed. "It really is." That night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had gone home and the children were finally asleep, Sarah and Caleb sat on the porch of the main house, their house now, and watched the stars come out. "Mrs. Callahan," Caleb said, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "Though it'll take some getting used to. I've been Sarah Holloway for a long time. You can be whoever you want to be. That's what freedom means." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about how far they'd come. A few months ago, she'd been homeless, desperate, dying in the snow, with 5 children who depended on her. Now she had a home, a husband, a future bright with possibility. "I have something to tell you," she said. Caleb tensed slightly. "Good something or bad something?" "Good. Very good." Sarah took his hand and pressed it against her stomach. "At least I think it's good." Caleb went very still. His eyes dropped to where his hand rested on her belly, then lifted to her face. You mean, I'm going to have a baby. Your baby. Our baby. For a long moment, Caleb didn't speak, didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. Then his face crumpled and he was crying, really crying, tears streaming down his cheeks as he pulled her into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. A baby, he whispered. Sarah, a baby. Are you happy? Happy. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes red but shining. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I don't have words. I don't know how to. He shook his head, laughing through his tears. A baby. Our baby. God, Sarah. I was scared to tell you, she admitted. I didn't know if you'd want. I want everything with you. Everything. Babies and chaos and noise and mess. I want to watch our children grow up. I want to grow old with you. I want all of it every single minute. Sarah felt her own tears spilling over. I love you, Caleb Callahan. I love you too, Sarah Callahan. He pressed his lips to her forehead. More than I thought I could love anyone. More than I thought I was capable of. They sat together as the night deepened around them, wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of the future they'd build together. 6 children, now 5, who'd come to them through tragedy, and 1 who would come through love. A ranch that had been silent for 8 years, now filled with laughter and footsteps and life. What do you think we should name the baby? Sarah asked. If it's a boy, I'd like to name him Thomas, after your first husband. Caleb's voice was soft. He gave you those 5 amazing children. Seems right to honor him. Sarah felt her heart swell. And if it's a girl? Then you choose. You've earned the right. Sarah thought about it. About all the women who'd come before her, her own mother, Caleb's mother, all the mothers who'd built lives and raised children and loved fiercely against impossible odds. Hope, she said. If it's a girl, I want to name her Hope. Hope, Caleb repeated. I like that. It's perfect. Hope. The thing that had kept Sarah going through the darkest times. The thing that had led her to this porch, this man, this life she'd never imagined possible. The story of Sarah Jane Callahan would be told for generations in that part of Wyoming. The widow who'd lost everything and found it again. The woman who'd walked through fire and come out stronger. The mother who'd saved her children through sheer force of will. But Sarah herself never thought of her story that way. To her, it was simple. She'd been lost, and then she was found. She'd been alone, and then she had a family. She'd given up on love, and then love had found her anyway. In late autumn, when the leaves had turned gold and the air smelled of wood smoke and change, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Hope, just as they'd planned, and she was welcomed into the world by 5 siblings who'd been counting the days until her arrival. Caleb held his daughter for the first time with the same wonder he'd shown when Samuel grabbed his finger, when Grace called him her knight, when Emma finally let herself trust him. But there was something different this time, something deeper. She's ours, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Really ours. From the beginning. They're all ours, Sarah reminded him. Every single one. I know. Caleb looked up at her with eyes that held no trace of the coldness she'd seen that first night. But this one, she'll never know what it's like to be afraid. Never know what it's like to be hungry or cold or unwanted. She'll grow up surrounded by love with brothers and sisters who'll protect her and parents who'd die for her. That's all any of us can give our children, Sarah said. Love and safety and hope. Hope. Caleb looked down at his daughter. That's a lot to live up to, little one. Baby Hope yawned and nestled closer to her father's chest, completely unconcerned with the weight of her name or the expectations it carried. Emma appeared in the doorway. Samuel on her hip, the other girls clustered behind her. Can we see her now? Lucy demanded. You said we could see her when she was born, and she's born now. "So can we see her?" "Come in," Sarah said, laughing. "Come meet your sister." The children crowded around Caleb, peering at the tiny bundle in his arms, with varying degrees of curiosity and awe. "She's so small," Grace whispered. "She's perfect," Emma corrected. "She looks like Papa Caleb." "She looks like a potato," Lucy said honestly. "A very cute potato." Caleb laughed a full, free sound that still surprised Sarah every time she heard it. "She'll grow out of the potato phase. Give her time." "Can I hold her?" Emma asked. Caleb looked at Sarah, who nodded and carefully transferred Hope into Emma's waiting arms. The 8-year-old held her baby sister with the practiced ease of someone who'd been helping raise children her whole life. "Hello, Hope," Emma said softly. "I'm your big sister Emma. I'm going to teach you everything. How to read and ride horses and stand up for yourself when people are mean." She paused. "And I'm going to tell you about our first Papa too, so you'll know where we came from. But mostly I'm going to tell you about Papa Caleb, about how he saved us when we needed saving, about how he learned to love us even though he'd forgotten how to love." Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. Caleb reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "She's got good siblings," he said quietly. "Best I've ever seen." They learned from the best. That night, after the children were asleep and Hope was settled in her cradle, Sarah stood at the window of the main house. Her house, their house, and looked out at the land that had become her home. The snow was falling again, soft and gentle, blanketing the world in white. But this time Sarah didn't see cold or danger or death. She saw beauty. She saw peace. She saw the promise of spring waiting beneath the frozen ground. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That first night," Sarah said. "When I collapsed in your yard. When I thought we were going to die. I remember. I was so scared, so sure that this was the end." Sarah leaned back against him. "And now look at us, married, 6 children, a home, a future." She shook her head. "If someone had told me then that this is where I'd end up, I never would have believed them." "Neither would I." Caleb pressed his lips to her hair. "I was dead inside that night, had been for years. Then you showed up on my doorstep, half frozen and desperate, and you woke something in me I thought was gone forever." "What did I wake?" "Hope." He smiled against her hair. "Same as our daughter. Same as what's kept you going through everything you've faced. You brought hope into my life, Sarah. You and those children. And I'll spend the rest of my days being grateful for it." Sarah turned in his arms and looked up at him. This man she loved. This man who'd saved her family and been saved by them in return. "I love you," she said. "I'm going to keep saying it until you get tired of hearing it." "I'll never get tired of hearing it." Caleb kissed her softly. "I love you too. More than I thought possible. More than I knew I could." Outside, the snow continued to fall gentle and quiet, covering the world in a blanket of white. Inside, 6 children slept peacefully, dreaming of horses and adventures and the bright future that awaited them. And in the main room of the Callahan Ranch, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds stood together looking out at the land they'd built a life on. They'd come through blizzards and illness and violence and fear. They'd faced down enemies and fought for their family and learned to trust again. They'd taken broken pieces and built something whole, something beautiful, something worth fighting for. Sarah Jane Callahan had been sold for nothing and found everything. She'd walked through hell and emerged into heaven. She'd given up on love and been proven gloriously wrong. And standing there in her husband's arms, with her children sleeping safely nearby and her baby daughter dreaming in her cradle, Sarah knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was finally, completely, irrevocably home.